3 days before Christmas, my phone buzzed with a message that shattered me. I was standing in line at the grocery store, holding a basket with milk, bread, and a cheap box of lights I had picked up on clearance. I wasn't planning on decorating much this year, but I thought maybe, just maybe, I could string them around my tiny apartment to bring some cheer. My rent was due soon, my car needed work, and I had been skipping lunches at work to stretch my paycheck, but Christmas still mattered to me. It mattered because, even if my family rarely showed me warmth, I still longed for those small moments when the world felt less cold. That's when my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, expecting maybe a holiday sale notification or a message from one of my coworkers, but it wasn't. It was a text from my parents. I froze as my eyes scanned the words. "Robin, it's better if you don't come to Christmas this year. Things will be easier without you." My breath caught in my throat. The grocery store suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too full of happy families and carts piled with turkeys and gingerbread kits. The words blurred in my vision as I reread them over and over. Easier without me. What does that even mean? My hands shook as I shoved the phone back into my pocket, but the words burned in my mind like hot coals. I finished paying for my groceries with a plastered-on smile for the cashier, but inside, I was unraveling. By the time I reached my car, the tears spilled over. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the windshield. I looked exhausted. Lonely. Forgotten. "Better if Robin doesn't show up," I whispered aloud, hearing how cruel it sounded. My parents had never been gentle with me, but to say this right before Christmas felt like a blade twisting in my chest. I couldn't help but think back to all the years before, when Christmas had been the one time I thought maybe, just maybe, I could belong. I remembered being 10 years old, running to the living room on Christmas morning while my older brother, Aaron, smirked as he opened his brand new basketball shoes, and my younger sister, Emily, squealed over her dollhouse. I had gotten socks that year. Just socks. My mom said it was practical, something I actually needed. I had smiled anyway, trying to be grateful, but deep down I wondered why my joy mattered less. Over the years, the message had been the same: Aaron was the golden child, Emily was the sweetheart, and I, Robin, was the problem. Too quiet, too different, too much of a reminder of what my parents didn't want to deal with. By the time I was 16, the comments weren't subtle anymore. "Why can't you be more like your brother? You'll never make anything of yourself with that attitude. Stop embarrassing us." So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised by that text. But I was. I think part of me always held on to hope that, someday, I would earn their acceptance. That if I worked hard enough, proved myself enough, maybe they'd see me as someone worth loving. My phone buzzed again, dragging me out of my thoughts. Another message. This one was shorter, colder. "Don't make this harder, Robin. Please respect our wishes." That word, respect, cut deep. Hadn't I spent my entire life respecting their wishes? Keeping quiet when they mocked me, staying out of the way when they praised my siblings, swallowing my pain so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable? Respect, to them, meant erasing myself. I leaned my head back against the seat, closing my eyes as memories tumbled in. Christmases where I sat at the end of the table, ignored while everyone else laughed and clinked glasses. Birthdays where they forgot to call. The countless times I tried to share something about my life, my job, my dreams, even just a funny story, only to be met with silence or, worse, that look of disappointment. And now, 3 days before Christmas, they were cutting me off completely. My chest tightened as I tried to breathe through the storm inside me. Part of me wanted to fire back an angry reply, to demand an explanation, to scream about the years of hurt they'd piled onto me. Another part of me wanted to delete the message and pretend it didn't matter, to numb myself like I'd done so many times before. But deep down, I knew this was a turning point. This wasn't just about Christmas. It was about everything: the years of rejection, the constant feeling of being the unwanted child, the endless cycle of hoping for love that never came. The pain in that moment wasn't just about being uninvited to dinner. It was about finally seeing the truth. No matter how much I gave, how much I tried, it was never enough for them. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my hoodie, trying to pull myself together. Outside, the world went on as usual, shoppers wheeling carts, kids tugging at their parents' coats, carols playing faintly from the store's speakers. I felt like I was standing on the edge of two worlds, theirs, full of warmth and belonging, and mine, cold and solitary. My phone sat heavy in my pocket, as if it were daring me to respond. I didn't. Not yet. I drove home in silence, the road ahead blurred by my tears. When I reached my apartment, I carried my groceries inside and dropped them on the counter. The box of clearance lights caught my eye. I had bought them to bring some cheer, but now they just felt mocking. Still, I opened them anyway. My hands shook as I strung them around the window, watching the soft glow fill the room. For a moment, I just stood there in the light, my chest aching, my mind racing. That text had broken something in me, but it had also lit something else. A spark. A question I couldn't ignore. If my own family didn't want me, then who was I living for? And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop begging for their love and start building something that couldn't be taken away. Something that was mine. I couldn't sleep that night. The glow from the cheap lights I had strung across my window flickered against the walls of my tiny apartment, and though they looked warm, I felt nothing but cold. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the words from my parents' text replaying in my head like a cruel chant, better if Robin doesn't show up. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory of my childhood came back, sharper than ever, as if my mind was determined to remind me how long this wound had been festering. I grew up in a house where love had rules. Aaron, my older brother, never had to earn it. He was the firstborn son, the shining example. He played sports, brought home trophies, and every time he scored a point, my parents would clap like he had cured cancer. Emily, my younger sister, was the princess. Sweet, pretty, adored by everyone. Teachers loved her, neighbors adored her, and my parents treated her like fragile glass. I was the middle child, invisible until I wasn't, and when I wasn't, it was only to be criticized. I remember being 9 years old, standing in the kitchen with a drawing I had worked on for hours. It was messy, but it was mine, bright colors, a house with smoke curling from the chimney, a crooked tree with hearts in the branches. "Look, Mom," I said, holding it up with a grin. She glanced at it, then sighed. "That's nice, Robin. But maybe you should focus on your math homework. You'll need real skills one day." She turned back to chopping vegetables while I stood there, my face burning. Aaron had just come in with AB+ on his science quiz, and she had hugged him like he had won a Nobel Prize. Little things like that built up. By the time I was a teenager, it wasn't little things anymore. Aaron was praised for leadership, Emily for kindness, and me? I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too lazy. I spent most of high school hiding in the library, sketching in notebooks, writing short stories, anything to escape the suffocating feeling of not being enough. When I tried to join conversations at the dinner table, Aaron would roll his eyes, Emily would giggle, and my dad would say, "Robin, don't start." Eventually, I stopped trying. One memory still stings like fresh salt on an open cut. It was Christmas Eve when I was 15. We were all sitting around the fireplace, exchanging one small gift before the big day. Aaron unwrapped a new watch, Emily a delicate bracelet. I opened my box and found deodorant. A stick of deodorant, wrapped clumsily in tissue paper. "You can use that," my dad said with a chuckle. My cheeks burned as Aaron and Emily laughed. I wanted to disappear. My mom added, "It's practical, Robin. Don't look so ungrateful." I forced a smile, muttered thanks, and swallowed the lump in my throat. That night I cried myself to sleep, wondering why my existence always felt like a burden. By the time I graduated high school, the pattern was set. I wasn't going to college like Aaron. I wasn't the charming golden girl like Emily. I took a job at a diner, bussing tables and saving what I could. My parents didn't hide their disappointment. "Robin, you'll never get anywhere this way," my dad said one night at dinner. "Look at your brother. Look at your sister. Why can't you be more like them? I wanted to scream, because I'm not them. I'm me. But I never said it. I just nodded and let the shame swallow me. When I finally moved out, it wasn't some grand celebration. My dad helped Aaron pack his things when he left for college. My mom cried when Emily moved into her first apartment. When I carried my boxes out to my beat-up car, no one came to the driveway. No one hugged me. My mom just waved vaguely from the kitchen window, as if I were a neighbor heading out for groceries. I drove away with a lump in my throat so big I could barely breathe. For years after, I tried to build a life for myself. Crappy jobs, shared apartments, nights counting coins to make rent. I stumbled, failed, started over. I kept thinking maybe if I could just achieve something, anything, my parents would finally see me. But no matter how many updates I sent, they never asked about my life. If I called, the conversations were short. If I visited, I felt like a guest in my own family. So when I got that text 3 days before Christmas, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final nail in a coffin that had been built for years. The wound wasn't fresh, it had always been there. But now it was undeniable. My parents didn't want me around. Not even for the holidays. Not even to sit quietly at the edge of the table. I sat on the floor of my apartment that night, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the blinking lights in the window. The soft hum of the heater filled the silence. I thought about all the times I had tried to earn their love, report cards I had worked hard on, drawings I had been proud of, little gifts I bought with my own money, and how every effort had been brushed aside. I thought about how many times I had asked myself, what's wrong with me? Why don't they love me like they love Aaron and Emily? And then, for the first time, another thought crept in. What if it's not me? What if it was never me? The idea terrified me, but it also cracked something open inside. Maybe I wasn't the wound. Maybe they were. Still, knowing that didn't make the pain disappear. It only made me feel more lost. Because if my family couldn't love me for who I was, then what was left? That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. But I also wasn't going to let them define me. If they didn't want me at Christmas, fine. But I would figure out who I was without them. And for the first time in my life, I would stop asking for a seat at their table. Little did I know, that decision would change everything. After that night, I threw myself into remembering every step of the road I had walked to get here, the messy, exhausting struggle of building a life when it felt like the world, and especially my own family, had written me off. When I first moved out, I thought freedom would taste sweet. But it didn't. It tasted like dollar menu burgers, unpaid bills, and the bitter tang of loneliness. I was 19, working double shifts at the diner. My hands always smelled like grease, my feet throbbed, and customers snapped their fingers at me like I was invisible. I smiled anyway, because I needed those tips. Rent was $650 a month back then, and scraping it together felt like climbing Mount Everest every 4 weeks. I lived in a basement apartment with 2 roommates, both older than me, both wrapped up in their own chaos. The walls were thin, the pipes clanged at night, and sometimes we'd lose heat for days. I slept with 2 hoodies on, curled under blankets, and told myself it was temporary. Everything was temporary. But life has a way of testing just how much you're willing to take. One winter, my car broke down. The repair cost more than I had in my bank account. I stood in the mechanic's lot, staring at the bill, my throat tight. My parents' voices rang in my head, "You'll never get anywhere like this. You can't even take care of yourself." I wanted to call them. I wanted to beg for help. But I didn't. Instead, I took the bus. 45 minutes each way, in the snow, carrying my uniform in a backpack so it wouldn't smell like wet slush. Then came the eviction scare. My roommates partied too much, fell behind on their share of rent, and the landlord threatened to kick us all out. I scrambled, working overtime, pawning the little jewelry I had, just to keep a roof over my head. My parents never knew. If they had, they would have used it as proof. See, Robin can't survive without us. So I carried it alone. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, clutching my pillow, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe I was the failure, the embarrassment, the child who just couldn't measure up. Maybe I was destined to scrape by, unnoticed and unloved. But here's the thing about struggle: it can break you, or it can forge you. Somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a fire lit inside me. I was tired of being invisible. Tired of hearing their voices in my head telling me I'd never make it. If I was going to prove them wrong, I had to do it with my own hands. So I started drawing again. Not doodles in the margins of notebooks, but real designs. Late at night, after shifts at the diner, I'd sit at my tiny kitchen table with a thrift store laptop and a cracked copy of Photoshop. I sketched logos, mocked up t-shirt designs, even taught myself how to build websites from scratch using free tutorials online. At first, it was just survival. I picked up small gigs on freelancing sites, $20 here, $50 there. It wasn't much, but the first time someone paid me for my work, really paid me for my ideas, it felt like oxygen rushing into my lungs. For once, I wasn't just the invisible middle child. I was someone creating value, someone who could build something from nothing. Of course, it wasn't a straight path. I messed up plenty. I undercharged, overpromised, and stayed up until 4 a.m. fixing mistakes. I lived on ramen noodles and coffee, and there were months when I barely made enough to keep the lights on. But slowly, painfully, it added up. I built a tiny portfolio. I earned repeat clients. And for the first time in my life, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed to be the disappointment. Still, the loneliness never left. Every holiday was a reminder. Thanksgiving dinners I spent eating takeout alone while my siblings posted family photos online. Birthdays where my phone stayed silent. And every Christmas, I went home anyway. I brought small gifts I couldn't afford, smiled through the awkward silences, and told myself being included, even as an afterthought, was better than nothing. But now, 3 days before Christmas, I had been cut off completely. And as much as it hurt, as much as it tore me open, I realized something in that moment. My whole life, I had been waiting for them to see me. To validate me. To love me. But maybe it was time I stopped waiting. The struggle had shaped me, yes, but it had also shown me I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. I had survived nights with no heat, weeks with barely enough food, months of scraping by. And I was still here. Still standing. Still building. I thought about that as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at my laptop. The screen glowed with half-finished designs for a new client. My hands were calloused, my eyes tired, but there was something else in me too, a stubborn spark that had carried me this far. Maybe Christmas wasn't about where I sat at the table, or whether my parents wanted me there. Maybe Christmas could be something else, something I created for myself. But the wound was still raw. The text replayed in my mind over and over, twisting like a knife. Better if Robin doesn't show up. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why. But beneath all that pain, another thought whispered, maybe this is your chance to stop begging. Maybe this is your chance to finally choose yourself. I didn't know what that meant yet. But I knew one thing: the struggle had taught me how to survive without their approval. And now, it was time to figure out how to live without it too. When you've spent your whole life being told you'll never measure up, the hardest part isn't proving them wrong, it's convincing yourself they were wrong in the first place. That was my battle. Every step forward felt like dragging chains of old voices behind me, voices whispering, "You're not enough, you'll never be enough." But I had survived too much already to let those voices win. I started small. My freelancing gigs were inconsistent, so I kept my diner job while taking on clients at night. It was exhausting. My body lived in two worlds, the one of greasy aprons and slammed dishes, and the one of glowing screens and endless design revisions. Sometimes I fell asleep at my desk, waking up with keyboard imprints on my cheek. But I pushed through. Because with every completed project, every satisfied client, I felt a piece of my confidence returning. One day, a small business owner named Mr. Alvarez hired me to redesign the menu for his family's Mexican restaurant. I poured myself into it, choosing warm colors, hand-drawing illustrations of tacos and margaritas, even adding a digital version for his new website. When I showed him the finished product, his eyes lit up. "Robin," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "this is beautiful. You've made us look like we belong downtown, not just on the corner." That moment stayed with me. For the first time in years, someone had looked at my work, not at me as a disappointment, not at me as a problem, but at my work and said it was beautiful. Those little wins stacked up. I upgraded from my thrift store laptop to a decent refurbished one. I saved enough to buy design software instead of cracked versions. I even got a used car again, so I didn't have to shiver at bus stops anymore. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a part of myself I thought I'd lost forever. But it wasn't just about work. Building myself meant learning how to be okay in my own skin. I started saying no when clients tried to underpay me. I stopped answering my parents' rare calls if they were just going to belittle me. I set boundaries. For someone who grew up trained to please, to shrink, to make myself invisible, that was harder than anything else. There were nights when loneliness clawed at me. Nights when I sat at my small table with microwave dinners, scrolling through pictures of Aaron's perfect family or Emily's glowing social media posts, wondering why I couldn't have that too. But slowly, I realized something. I didn't need to chase their picture of happiness. I could create my own. So I built little rituals. Saturday mornings, I'd make pancakes from scratch, even if it was just for me. On Sundays, I'd light a candle and draw for no one but myself. On my birthday, I baked a cake, one of those box mixes with too much frosting, and sang happy birthday to me. It felt silly at first, but it was also healing. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to make me feel celebrated. I was celebrating me. And as I built these small routines, my confidence grew. I began reaching out to bigger clients, pitching myself with the belief that I could actually deliver. Some said no. Many ignored me. But a few said yes, and those yes turned into opportunities one never thought I'd have. I'll never forget the night I landed my first contract over $1,000. I stared at the email, rereading the number, making sure I wasn't imagining it. Tears spilled down my face as I whispered, I did it. I really did it. It wasn't just about the money, it was about proving to myself that I had value. That I wasn't the family embarrassment. That I was capable of building something real. But growth doesn't erase old wounds. Every milestone I hit, every little victory, there was still a part of me that wished my parents could see. That wished they would say, "We're proud of you, Robin." It was a longing I couldn't shut off, no matter how hard I tried. So when Christmas rolled around, and I got that text saying I shouldn't come, the pain hit all over again. It was as if my progress didn't matter to them. I could have been a millionaire, a saint, a hero, it wouldn't have mattered. To them, I'd always be Robin, the one who didn't fit, the one better left out. But maybe that was the point. Maybe building myself meant letting go of the fantasy that they would ever change. Maybe it meant realizing that their approval was never the measure of my worth. As I sat in my little apartment, the glow of my clearance lights surrounding me, I thought about all the times I'd been dismissed, overlooked, rejected. And then I thought about all the times I had gotten back up anyway. That resilience, that stubbornness, that was mine. They couldn't take that away. So I made myself a promise. If my parents didn't want me at their Christmas table, fine. But I would make a new table. A table built with my own hands, for people who actually wanted me there. People who saw me, not as an embarrassment, but as someone worth loving. I didn't know who those people would be yet. Maybe friends I hadn't met. Maybe family I'd create someday. But I knew one thing, I was done begging for scraps of love from people who kept locking the door. And as painful as that was, it was also freeing. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't powerless. I wasn't the forgotten middle child anymore. I was Robin, and I was building myself, piece by piece, into someone I could finally be proud of. The night after I got that text, I hit rock bottom. My apartment felt like a tomb, lit by nothing but the blinking lights I'd strung up in a desperate attempt to feel festive. They mocked me now, their soft glow reminding me of everything I wasn't invited to, everything I had lost. I sat at my tiny kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, staring at my phone. The message glared back at me from the screen: "Robin, it's better if you don't come to Christmas this year. Things will be easier without you." And then the follow-up: "Don't make this harder. Please respect our wishes." I must have read it 100 times, each word digging deeper into me. Easier without you. Did they really see me as such a burden? Was my presence at the family table such a stain that Christmas itself would be lighter without me? The worst part wasn't even the rejection. It was the confirmation. Deep down, I had always feared this was how they saw me. The socks for Christmas, the deodorant, the sighs when I spoke, the way they cheered for Aaron and Emily but never for me, it had all been leading to this. And now, in black and white on a glowing screen, I had proof. My chest ached so badly I had to clutch it, like my heart was trying to rip itself out of me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall. I wanted to curl up and disappear. But instead, I just sat there, shaking, whispering to myself, why isn't who I am ever enough? I thought about the years I had bent myself into shapes trying to fit in. The holidays where I laughed at jokes that stung, smiled while being ignored, pretended I didn't notice the absence of love. I thought about all the ways I had kept showing up, even when I wasn't wanted. And for what? For a text telling me I wasn't welcome? That night, I let myself break. I cried harder than I had in years, sobs shaking my whole body until my throat was raw. The sound filled the empty apartment, echoing off the walls like some wounded animal. I buried my face in my hands and let it pour out, all the loneliness, all the rejection, all the aching hunger for love that had never been given. When the tears slowed, anger took their place. Not the hot, quick kind, but a slow, simmering rage that burned in my gut. How dare they? How dare they decide that I was disposable? That their holiday would be brighter if I was erased? That I wasn't worth a chair at the table? I stood up suddenly, pacing the room, fists clenched. "I'm not worthless," I said aloud, my voice trembling. "I've built my own life. I've fought for everything I have. I've survived things they don't even know about." My chest heaved, my eyes swollen, but for the first time that night, I felt something other than despair. I felt defiance. Still, the question of what to do about the text gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to cave, to obey like I always had. If they didn't want me there, fine. I could hide, lick my wounds, and let them celebrate without me. That would be the easy way. The familiar way. But another part of me, a louder part, wanted to respond. To finally say everything I had swallowed for years. To stop shrinking and start standing up, even if my voice shook. I stared at the blinking cursor on my phone's message box, my thumbs hovering over the keyboard. I typed and erased, over and over. Every version felt either too harsh or too weak. Nothing seemed big enough to hold all the hurt, all the rage, all the desperate longing inside me. Finally, I dropped the phone on the table and buried my face in my arms. What do I even say? I whispered into the dark. What words could possibly cover a lifetime of this? Sleep never came. I lay in bed, tossing, turning, the text haunting me every time I closed my eyes. At dawn, I gave up. I got dressed, pulled on my hoodie, and walked out into the cold morning air. The streets were quiet, dusted with snow. My breath fogged in front of me as I walked aimlessly, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. I passed houses glowing with Christmas decorations, reindeer on lawns, wreaths on doors, kids' laughter spilling from windows. Each one was a reminder of the family I wanted and the one I had. I felt like an outsider peering into a world I'd never belonged to. Eventually, I found myself at a small park. I sat on a frozen bench, the wood biting through my jeans, and pulled out my phone again. The messages were still there, waiting. Mocking. And something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep carrying this wound in silence. I couldn't keep letting them dictate my worth. I didn't know what I would write yet. But I knew one thing, I was going to reply. Not with the desperate begging of a child wanting love, but with the strength of someone who had survived without it. My hands shook as I unlocked the phone, but my heart was steady for the first time all night. I didn't have the words yet, but I knew they were coming. And when they did, they wouldn't just be a reply to that text. They would be a reply to a lifetime of being overlooked, dismissed, and unwanted. The breaking point had come, and I wasn't going to stay broken. The next morning, I woke up with the cold sting of reality pressing on me. The text was still there, unread messages glaring at me from my phone like tiny daggers. Better if Robin doesn't show up. Don't make this harder. I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. Something had shifted inside me after last night's breaking point. I realized that silence wouldn't heal me. Obedience wouldn't make me whole. If I wanted to take back my dignity, I had to respond. But the question wasn't simple. What do I say? I paced my apartment, pacing circles around the threadbare carpet, my fists clenched at my sides. Should I lash out? Should I plead? Should I beg them to let me in? Each option felt inadequate. I had spent my whole life shrinking myself for them, bending, apologizing, begging for scraps of approval. Doing that again now would undo everything I had fought to build. I sat down at my table, the laptop still open from my freelance work, and stared at the blank screen. The cursor blinked at me, judging. I thought about my childhood, all the Christmases I had sat quietly at the edges of their celebrations. I thought about Aaron's smug smile, Emily's sweet laughter, my parents' disapproving looks. I thought about every time I had been told I wasn't enough. And I thought about everything I had done in spite of it. I had survived. I had built a life on my own terms. I had worked through every obstacle without their help. I had achieved things they didn't see, didn't care to see, and yet still persisted. That was my strength, my proof, my answer. I grabbed my phone again, opened the message, and started typing. Words flowed awkwardly at first, hesitant and shaky. I want you to understand something. I deleted it. That sounded weak. Then, I'm hurt, but I'm stronger than you think. No, that sounded bitter. I poured another cup of coffee, sat back, and closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel small. It was about standing tall in the space they had tried to erase me from. I remembered every step I had taken, the double shifts, the sleepless nights, the empty apartments, the calls I didn't make to ask for help. I remembered how I had grown into someone capable of facing rejection and still building. My hands shook as I typed the next line, letting honesty, pride, and courage guide me. I have spent my life being overlooked, dismissed, and treated like I don't belong. And for years, I stayed silent, hoping you would see me. But I realize now that my worth does not depend on your approval. I paused. I could feel the fire rising in me, the defiance, the resolve. This wasn't just about Christmas anymore. It was about reclaiming myself from decades of being told I wasn't enough. I typed again, I've built my own life. I've worked hard, I've struggled, I've survived. I don't need your permission to exist, to celebrate, or to be proud of who I am. I reread it. It was raw, but it was honest. Strong. True. I felt my chest expand with the weight of those words. For the first time, I wasn't asking them to love me. I wasn't begging to be seen. I was declaring, firmly and clearly, that I was already here, already accomplished, and already enough. But there was one more part one couldn't ignore, the part that still ached. I did want connection, even if I had stopped chasing it for validation. I wanted them to understand, to maybe someday respect the person I had become. I typed the last lines carefully, letting compassion, not bitterness, guide me. If you want me at your table, you will be welcomed. But I will not diminish myself to make you comfortable. I am Robin, and I am worthy of being here, on my terms, or not at all. I sat back, my hands trembling, staring at the screen. The weight of decades pressed against my shoulders, but there was also lightness. I had made my choice. I had spoken for myself. I had finally written the words I had carried silently for years. Then came the hardest part, pressing send. For a moment, I froze. My finger hovered over the screen. Doubts crept in. What if they hate me? What if they never forgive me? What if this ruins everything? But deep down, I knew these doubts weren't stronger than my truth. They had tried to define me for years. Now it was my turn to define myself. I pressed send. The message whooshed across the invisible wires, landing in their phones, waiting. I felt an immediate release, as if the act itself had lifted a weight from my chest. I didn't know how they would respond. I didn't even know if they would respond. But for the first time, I felt whole, because I had spoken my truth. I sank back in my chair, letting exhaustion wash over me. Tears welled in my eyes, but these were different from the ones I had cried before. They weren't tears of hurt, or anger, or rejection. They were tears of liberation. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own side of the line, unshaken by their judgment, unbroken by their absence, and strong enough to face whatever came next. That night, I wrapped myself in blankets, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall silently outside. For the first time in a long time, Christmas didn't feel like a reminder of what I lacked. It felt like a promise. A promise that I could choose myself, honor my journey, and decide how I wanted to celebrate, not as a guest in someone else's story, but as the author of my own. And somewhere deep in the quiet, beneath the ache and the fire and the long shadows of the past, I felt a small, fragile hope. Maybe this year, Christmas would be different. Maybe this time, I would finally be seen, not because I begged for it, not because I cowered, but because I had claimed it for myself. The decision was made. The reply was sent. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt alive. I didn't know what to expect after hitting send. My phone sat on the table, screen lit, silent except for the soft hum of notifications from other apps. I kept glancing at it, half expecting the familiar sting of rejection, another curt text, another reminder that I didn't belong. But I also knew I had said what I needed to say. That was enough, at least for now. Minutes felt like hours. I paced my apartment, hands shoved into the pockets of my hoodie, heart hammering like a drum. I kept replaying the words I had written, I am Robin, and I am worthy of being here, on my terms, or not at all. Every syllable rang with the weight of years of silence finally broken. I thought about my childhood, about all the times I had been told I was too much, too sensitive, too embarrassing. And for the first time, I felt liberated. Then, just as I was beginning to let myself breathe, my phone buzzed. I froze mid-step, staring at the screen as my mother's name appeared. My chest tightened. What now? I tapped it open, and her first words hit me like a jolt of ice water. Robin, we didn't realize. We're so sorry. I blinked, unsure if I had read it right. My father's response followed seconds later. We were wrong. Please, can we talk? For a moment, disbelief held me in its grip. I sank into my chair, phone trembling in my hands. I had prepared myself for anger, for silence, for dismissal. Not this. Not apology. Not acknowledgement. My parents were apologizing. I typed back cautiously, my fingers hovering. You don't get to erase years of hurt with a few words. But I'm listening. The conversation that followed wasn't perfect. It was messy, awkward, full of long pauses and tentative admissions. My mother admitted that she had been harder on me than on my siblings, that she had compared me unfairly, that she had often looked at Aaron and Emily as the successful ones while overlooking my efforts. My father acknowledged that he had favored the kids who fit his idea of achievement and had failed to notice the ways I had grown and survived on my own. I listened, really listened, but I also held my ground. I told them how it felt to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be told over and over that I wasn't enough. I didn't yell. I didn't cry, well, maybe a little, but I spoke calmly, with a strength that surprised even me. Every word was a boundary, a declaration. I am not the child you wanted. I am the adult I became, and I deserve to be seen as that. By the time the conversation ended, we weren't fixed. There were no fairy tale resolutions, no sudden warmth, no magical erase of decades of pain. But something had shifted. They had seen me, not the Robin they wished for, but the Robin who existed in the real world. The Robin who had survived, who had built a life from scraps, who refused to shrink herself anymore. A few hours later, another text came from Emily. Robin, we were mean. I didn't realize how much you went through. Can I see you on Christmas? I smiled, a small, cautious smile. The wounds weren't gone, but acknowledgement was a start. Maybe even forgiveness was possible, if slowly, carefully, over time. I sat back and looked around my apartment, at the strings of blinking lights, at the small stack of handmade cards I had started working on for friends, at the cup of coffee I had abandoned in the chaos of emotion. I realized something profound. The table I had feared would be empty this Christmas didn't have to be. It could be filled, not only by family, but by people who actually chose to be there, who actually wanted me around. I thought about my friends from work, the people who had stood by me through long shifts and bad days. I thought about my clients who valued my work, who trusted me with their businesses. I thought about the life I had built, piece by piece, without anyone's permission. That was my table, too. And this year, it could be full. Then, just before midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another message from my mom, this time shorter, more tentative. We're proud of you, Robin. We're so proud. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness, not from longing, but from a deep, aching relief. Recognition at last, in whatever imperfect form it came. It wasn't validation that I needed to survive, but it was recognition that I had earned. I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth of that tiny acknowledgement seep into me. And for the first time in years, I felt ready. Ready to face Christmas not as the overlooked middle child, not as the embarrassment, but as the Robin who had fought, who had survived, who had claimed her place at the table. I looked at the blinking lights, soft and gentle, and whispered to myself, I did it. I survived. I belong. And for the first time, the word didn't sting. It didn't feel like an aspiration. It felt true. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized something important. Sometimes, the reply isn't just about what you say, it's about showing up in your own life fully, unapologetically. And that night, after years of being silenced, I had finally done both. The day before Christmas, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Aaron. I froze when I saw his name. For years, Aaron had been the one I both envied and feared, my older brother who seemed to glide through life, always favored, always celebrated. His message was short, tentative, unlike anything I would have expected. Robin, can we talk? I owe you an apology. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Could he really mean it? Or was this just some obligatory holiday attempt at politeness? I debated for what felt like minutes, then slowly typed back, we can talk. I'll listen. The conversation that followed was awkward, yes, but real. He admitted that he had taken my silence for granted, assumed I didn't care, assumed that I had given up because I wanted to. He confessed that he had envied my persistence, my ability to survive without the constant reassurance he had always received. For once, I didn't have to compete with him. Instead, we talked, truly talked, as siblings trying to understand each other after years of distance. Then came Emily's visit. She arrived with her sweet, nervous smile, carrying a small gift that I didn't open immediately. She pulled me into a hug that was hesitant but genuine. Robin, I was so wrong, she whispered. I didn't see everything you've done, all the ways you've struggled and grown. I'm sorry I never told you I was proud. It felt strange at first, this new dynamic where they had to meet me as an equal, not the child they had shaped in their own image. But there was also a sense of relief. We could talk, argue, even laugh, without the shadows of past neglect hovering as heavily as before. When my parents arrived, it was tense at first. My mom's eyes were red from crying, my dad's jaw tight with the weight of unspoken guilt. We sat at the small table in my apartment, thankfully big enough to hold everyone, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize for existing. Instead, I greeted them warmly, acknowledging their presence without letting it define me. The conversation wasn't perfect. There were tears, sharp words, even moments when I wanted to bolt and leave. But there were also laughter, stories shared, and moments of genuine connection. Slowly, I realized that Christmas didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. It didn't have to erase the past to celebrate the present. At one point, my dad leaned back, looking genuinely reflective. "Robin, I think we've underestimated you for a long time," he said. "I see now how much you've accomplished on your own. I'm proud of you." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. It wasn't everything I had wished for, but it was enough. It was acknowledgement. Recognition. Respect. Something I had longed for but finally understood had to be earned, not begged for. We ate together, awkwardly at first, but then more naturally. Emily passed me the gravy boat, Aaron offered to help with the dishes, my mom laughed at a story I told about a client mishap at work. The warmth wasn't the kind I had hoped for as a child, it wasn't unconditional or effortless, but it was real. And after years of being left out, I could finally see that real connection was far more valuable than imagined perfection. Later, after the meal, we exchanged gifts. I had splurged on small, thoughtful presents for them, but the greatest gift came in return, understanding. My parents gave me a small plaque I hadn't expected, engraved with the words, "To Robin, who has built her life with courage and determination. We are proud." I almost dropped it. Almost. But I didn't. I held it close, feeling a warmth I hadn't known I could feel from them. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle that erased years of neglect. But it was a bridge, a fragile, honest bridge connecting the past with the possibility of the future. Later that evening, we sat around the tiny tree I had decorated with my clearance lights. I watched my family, laughing and talking, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the outsider. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing for breathing. I belonged, not because they had given me permission, but because I had claimed it for myself. I realized that the fallout, the turbulence of emotions, the confrontation of old wounds, had been necessary. It hurt because it mattered. The words I had sent had not only spoken for me, they had forced everyone to face the reality they had ignored for years. And in facing it, they began to understand. By the end of the night, I felt a strange sense of peace. The apartment smelled faintly of pine, the lights twinkled softly, and even the shadows seemed kinder somehow. I thought about the future, knowing the road ahead would still have challenges, misunderstandings, and perhaps more moments of rejection. But I also knew this, I had earned my place. I had earned my voice. And I had earned the right to be seen as the person I had fought so hard to become. As they left that night, hugging me tightly, I felt a quiet pride. I had survived the storm of neglect and indifference. I had faced my family with honesty and courage. And I had not only survived, I had transformed the way they saw me, and maybe, just maybe, the way I saw myself as well. I closed the door behind them, the apartment now empty except for me, my lights, and the soft hum of the heater. I sank onto the couch, exhausted but alive, and whispered to the quiet room, I did it. I survived, I stood my ground, and I finally belong. For the first time in years, Christmas felt like something I could truly celebrate, not because the past was perfect, but because I had claimed my own place in the story. The days after that Christmas felt surreal. My apartment, once a quiet refuge, now buzzed with messages and small visits from family members who had slowly begun to see me, not as the overlooked middle child, not as the family embarrassment, but as Robin, the person who had survived and built herself from nothing. Aaron texted first, "Lunch tomorrow? I want to hear about your new project." His words were casual, but there was something beneath them, a recognition, a respect that hadn't existed before. I typed back a simple sure, feeling a small spark of warmth, tempered by years of caution. Emily followed a few hours later. I'm proud of you, Robin. Let's not wait another year to celebrate. Her words carried sincerity. It was tentative, fragile, like a butterfly's wings brushing against your hand, but it was real. And that mattered. My parents, too, began to shift. My mother sent me a message one morning. Robin, we want to understand your life better. Can we come over for dinner? I paused, thinking about years of meals where I had been invisible, silenced, and minimized. But this time, the offer felt different. It was an acknowledgement of change, not a demand for compliance. When they arrived, I noticed small gestures that had never existed before. My father helped me bring in groceries without a hint of judgment. My mother complimented the apartment, the way I had decorated it, and asked genuine questions about my work. The conversation wasn't perfect, we still stumbled over old wounds, and moments of awkwardness lingered. But for the first time, I felt the possibility of real connection, an acknowledgement that the past didn't have to define the present. It was during dinner that a small miracle happened. My mom paused mid-conversation, eyes moist, and said softly, Robin, I want to thank you for showing us who you've become. We've been blind to your strength for too long. I felt my throat tighten. These were the words I had longed to hear, not to be coddled, not to erase the pain, but to be seen, recognized, and respected. I nodded, letting the acknowledgement sink in. Thank you, I whispered. I've had to fight for every step of my life. I didn't do it to prove anyone wrong. I did it to survive, and to become someone I can be proud of. My dad reached across the table, hesitated, then placed his hand over mine. We're proud of you, Robin, he said, his voice thick. We may have failed to show it before, but we see it now. Tears welled up, but they were tears of relief, not hurt. For the first time, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It wasn't about pretending the neglect and pain never existed. Healing was about acknowledgement, understanding, and rebuilding the connection on honest terms. The evening continued with tentative laughter, shared memories, and small acts of reconciliation. We didn't resolve every tension, nor did we erase the years of distance. But there was progress, a fragile thread weaving us closer together. I saw my parents' eyes soften when they watched me talk about my projects, my struggles, and my victories. I saw Erin listen with genuine interest instead of casual dismissal. I saw Emily's admiration in her eyes, no longer mixed with envy or ignorance. That night, after they left, I sat on my couch, staring at the soft glow of my holiday lights. I realized that Christmas had transformed from a season of rejection to a season of possibility. I had faced the moment I had feared the most, had spoken my truth, and had been met with recognition, not perfection, but recognition. And that was enough. I thought about the years of struggle, the moments of doubt, the nights I cried alone, and I felt a profound sense of pride. I had survived being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued. I had survived being told I wasn't enough. And I had done more than survive. I had grown, learned, and built myself into someone worthy of respect, love, and a seat at any table I chose. The path ahead wasn't free of challenges. My family still had their flaws, their old habits, their moments of impatience or misunderstanding. But now, I knew I could navigate those moments without losing myself. I had discovered my own strength, my own voice, and my own place in the world. I realized, too, that healing sometimes meant saying goodbye, not in anger, but in love. Some aspects of the past, some expectations and resentments, had to be left behind for progress to exist. I let go of the need to be the perfect child or the invisible middle one. I let go of the fantasy that they could ever fully undo the past. I embraced the truth that I had grown, that I had survived, and that my worth was mine to claim. As I curled up on the couch, sipping hot cocoa, I whispered to myself, I belong. I've earned this. I am enough. The holiday lights twinkled softly, and for the first time, I felt a peace that had eluded me for years. The wounds of neglect were still there, scars that would never fully fade, but they no longer dictated my story. I had survived, I had spoken my truth, and I had begun the work of mending, not just my relationship with my family, but with myself. That night, I didn't just celebrate Christmas. I celebrated my resilience, my courage, and the reclamation of my life. And as sleep finally pulled me under, I knew one thing with certainty: I would never let anyone, not even my family, make me feel invisible again. I had faced the breaking point, made my decision, stood my ground, and now, I was healing. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in my life, I was truly free. The morning after that Christmas felt different. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft glow of my holiday lights, now dimmed but still twinkling like small stars. I sat on the couch with a cup of coffee in my hands, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past few days, the breaking point, the reply, the conversations, and the first real moments of acknowledgement from my family. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity about my life. I wasn't the overlooked middle child anymore. I wasn't the embarrassment my parents' words had once branded me as. I was Robin, a survivor, a creator, a fighter. And now, for the first time, I was ready to step fully into the life I had built, without waiting for anyone's approval. I thought about all the small steps that had led me here, the nights working double shifts at the diner, the endless freelance projects, the quiet resilience that had carried me through loneliness, heartbreak, and self-doubt. Every hardship, every sleepless night, every tear I had shed, it had all brought me here. And I realized something profound: the journey itself had shaped me into someone unbreakable. I took a deep breath and pulled out my laptop. I opened the draft of a new project I had been hesitant to start, fearing I didn't have the confidence to finish it. But now, with my family beginning to see me differently and my own voice stronger than ever, I felt ready. I clicked save and then publish, sending the project into the world with a quiet determination. It wasn't just about work, it was a declaration of independence, a signal that I was claiming my space in life on my own terms. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. It was a group message from my family. "Robin, we're thinking of coming by later. We'd love to spend some more time with you before the new year." I paused, staring at the words. I could feel the familiar fear rising, the fear of being overlooked, dismissed, or hurt again. But it didn't control me anymore. I typed back simply, "Come by. I'd like that." When they arrived, the atmosphere was tentative but warm. There was no pretense, no overcompensation, just a willingness to connect. We shared stories, laughed at old memories, and even played board games I hadn't touched in years. My parents asked questions about my work and listened intently. Aaron and Emily teased me playfully, and for the first time, I felt genuinely included, not because I had proven myself, but because I had chosen to be present and unapologetic. As the evening drew on, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: hope. Hope that relationships could be rebuilt, even if imperfectly. Hope that my voice would always matter. Hope that I could honor my own journey while slowly letting others in. After everyone left, I stood by the window, looking out at the snow-covered streets. The city sparkled with lights, cars passed slowly, and children played in the park nearby. I thought about the years I had spent feeling invisible and unworthy, and I smiled to myself. Those years hadn't been wasted, they had forged me into someone capable of facing rejection, standing firm, and embracing life fully. I sat back down, sipping the last of my coffee, and made a mental note to reach out to friends I had drifted from, to take on new challenges, and to continue building the life I had always dreamed of. I realized that the holidays, family, and recognition were just part of the picture. The core of my happiness came from knowing my own worth, honoring my journey, and embracing the person I had become. For the first time, I felt free from the weight of expectations, free from the need for validation, and free to step into my own story. I knew there would still be obstacles, moments of doubt, and challenges to face. But now I had the confidence to navigate them, knowing that my strength came from within. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I whispered softly to myself, "This is my life. I've earned my place. I belong." The words weren't just a mantra, they were a declaration. A promise to myself that I would never allow anyone to make me feel small again. Lying in bed, I reflected on the journey, the breaking point, the reply, the conversations, and the quiet moments of acknowledgement. I realized that the true gift of this Christmas wasn't the apology or the recognition from my family. It was the realization that I had always had the power to define my worth and claim my space in the world. And as I drifted off to sleep, the soft glow of the twinkling lights illuminating my room, I felt a deep, abiding peace. The past had shaped me, the present was mine to claim, and the future was bright with possibility. This was more than a new beginning, it was the start of a life lived fully, boldly, and unapologetically. For the first time in my life, I felt the full weight and freedom of being seen, of standing firm, and of being exactly who I was meant to be. And in that quiet, profound moment, I knew, Robin was home, home in herself, home in her life, and home in the world she had fought so hard to claim.